Have you ever engaged with a show or movie and felt like you didn't fully get it, but you already finished it and you didn't really like it enough to rewatch it or critically examine it, so you just move on with a lingering sense of incompleteness about what made this show special and different? For me, this show was Akame ga Kill. Coming out in 2014, it was known as the edgy show that killed all its characters in really heart wrenching ways. I was unaware of this when I watched the first episode of what looked like a pretty generic anime. I was surprised by the twist in the first major character death, which then hooked me enough to finish the rest of the show. But as I said before, I felt like I was missing a layer, that there was something under the surface that was just outside of my young mind's reach. Today I want to re-explore the major plot points, characters, and setting to figure out what left me with that sense of incompleteness from my first viewing. With that being said, spoilers for the whole manga of Akame ga Kill, which is a decade old at this point, so I feel like I shouldn't need to say it. Additional content warning for sexual assault, gore, torture, and basically all other bad stuff you can think of, as this show is super dark. This video isn't intended to replace the experience of reading the manga or watching the anime for yourself. However, I would keep in mind that there's a lot of unpleasant topics, as previously mentioned. I would recommend reading this if you like interesting takes on fantasy with understandable characters and a unique perspective that isn't typically displayed in media. We start by meeting the central protagonist named Tatsumi, who's killing a giant monster known as a danger beast to help some random travelers on his way to the capital city. He's headed to the capital to gain money for his small village that is struggling due to high taxes, with his childhood friends Iyatsu and Sayo, whom he got separated from on the road. Tatsumi is naive and kind to a fault, like many other shonen protagonists. However, in the world of Akame ga Kill, naivete is punished harshly. Additionally, you might notice the art style is very unique. It's kind of generic, but a lot of like the finer details of the art are different. It's very distinguished. I feel like you can recognize it from the first moment. Things really kind of pop, and there's a lot of action and movement in the paneling. I do feel like sometimes there's too much action, but say la vie. We see Tatsumi as he is attempting to enlist in the army, claiming that he's easily strong enough to be in the position of captain, which gets him kicked him out of the recruitment office immediately. He then wanders around until a strange woman named Leon approaches him, claiming that they have a contract that can get him a high position for some coin. He gives her all of his money and waits for her to return to the bar. This was an obvious trick, demonstrating that there are no free lunches and that trusting people to do good in the capital is foolish at best and dangerous at worst. Now, without money or the ability to join the army, he sleeps on the street until he's found by a rich noble girl named Arya, who he offers to give some food and a place to rest. After getting some degree of confirmation from the guards that she does this often, he agrees to accept their help in exchange for going shopping on the next day. This shows some growth, as he doesn't just automatically accept the help of a stranger, but he is still far too trusting, as we are about to see. Additionally, he asks if the parents have seen Sayo or Iyatsu, and they said that they hadn't, but they will look out. So it seems like these are just generally good people. The next morning, they go about the city, where Tatsumi first hears of both Night Raid, the assassin group that's been taking out high-profile targets in the city, which is the central characters for the show, as well as the Child Emperor and the Prime Minister, who's controlling him and who's at the center of corruption in the city, which is the main evil people in the show. Evil is kind of subjective. The Child Emperor, I don't think, is as evil, but the Prime Minister definitely would be under the category of evil. We then learn that the infamous assassins, Night Raid, the group we just learned about, are here, killing Arya's mother and attempting to kill Arya. The guards defending the family see the assassins killing them as punishment, that the guards themselves are rotten to the core, which is strange because they seem to just be normal people doing normal people things. We also see that the assassins are different from normal fighters, wielding strange weapons such as giant scissors and a sword that causes markings to appear on the flesh after a cut. Tatsumi defends Arya and is stabbed by the cursed sword. However, a relic gifted to him by the village elder, who put him and his friends on this quest to begin with, saves him. It blocks the cut, and it's like in his pocket. Yeah, I'll show you the panel. It's then revealed that the assassins are in the right, and this noble family has a secret barn that exists for the purpose of torturing random people and drugging them for their amusement. Among those kidnaps are Tatsumi's friends. Sayo is already dead, and Iyatsu is dying of poison. Tatsumi is then filled with rage and kills the noble girl, and is subsequently recruited into Night Raid, scouted by the woman who had previously swindled him, named Leon. This is a really impactful first chapter, I think. It sets up a lot of the things. It sets up Night Raid. It sets up the vibes, I think, where you have like a lot of surface level interaction between various parts and political things are set up. Also, the twist of basically this noble family, the people in a lot of kind of older fantasy media are seen as the good people, are just shown to be like needlessly cruel and intentionally tricking new people to torture them purely for their own sake. It also shows like the real like depravity and darkness of the capital. Um, yeah, which I think kind of like that's why I kind of went into a lot of detail about this first chapter, because I think it demonstrates many of the strengths of Agame ga Kill, such as subversion, very solid artwork, and a willingness to show the death of main characters, specifically Iatsu and Sayo, as well as showing some degree of sympathy towards the enemy, in this instance, the guards. They were given kind of like they knew they were in the wrong. So you kind of have sympathy, like it's just a job, but they still felt bad about doing their job, so they're not sad about their death, in a sense. All of these traits set it apart from the typical shonen formula, creating a unique show. In a typical shonen, I think Tatsumi likely would have found his friends on the brink of death, swooping in to save them, and then all of them could be recruited to the Revolutionary Army or Night Raid. But instead they die, and this is for the amusement of those in power, to demonstrate the cruelty of the higher-ups in the capital and highlight why the assassins' violence against those are justified. This sets the tone of the show that people with unchecked power often use that power for cruelty, creating the will to revolt against such systems. Additionally, Akame ga Kill will expand on the sympathy that was given to the guards who accepted death and felt guilt over their compliance in the action of their masters. I also, another thing I want to touch on is kind of like the art highlighting and kind of making the horror of the situation even greater. Like there's this very distinct panel of Tatsumi's face when he sees kind of the depravity of the capital, and I think that kind of is he's the projection character who we're supposed to latch onto, and he's the POV character, the main character. And so I think that panel is kind of how we're supposed to feel, and kind of how as he gets hardened to the stuff he has to do, and like how awful the capital is and all these different moral complications, like we're supposed to grow and with him and develop nuance in our own opinions on things, which is the point of a POV character. But I think having a naive POV character in a world like this makes it so that you kind of latch on very quickly. So I'm going to be breaking down the manga into unofficial arcs where we'll describe the important action that takes place as well as any details that matter for the overarching narrative. This will include what I consider to be the themes of the series, world-building elements, character breakdowns, as well as the infamous character deaths. This first arc is the most complex as there is a lot of information and characters introduced at the same time, as well as kind of the general aesthetic and themes of the world. But this format will make more sense as the series develops and kind of falls into this consistent pattern. Also, as previously mentioned, this will be spoiling the entire plot of the manga and the anime, so if you can handle the content, I recommend experiencing the series for yourself. The anime is, I believe, on Hulu, and the manga is just online nebulously. I don't know what the official source is, I'm sorry. Alright, so we pick back up with Tatsumi 3 days after the incident at the Noble House, reminiscing about his recently deceased friends and meeting our colorful band of characters that make up Night Raid. Leon is the first member that Tatsumi met and has a lion Tegu. She basically eats and drinks all the time. As we will soon learn through the character interactions, Leon is kind of like the irresponsible older sister of the group, who is usually acting unseriously and riling up the other members. She joined the cause as someone who had grown up with the downtrodden districts and saw the degree of corruption of the capital firsthand. She's also generally kind of just a ruffian and a rebel against systems in general. As shown kind of with her introduction with Tatsumi, she, scams him, and that's something she kind of does. She owes everybody money, and I think that kind of, I don't know, she's kind of reminiscent of someone who would rebel against the capital because it exists as an entity trying to control her, even if it wasn't directly evil per se. She might be like a Robin Hood type. It says for like lazier and more sexually promiscuous. We then meet Shiel, who is reading a book about how to cure her airheadedness. She wields the Tegu, scissor Tegu called Ecstasy, and it's said that the scissors are able to cut through anything. They also have a hidden ability, which I'll kind of discuss later. All Tegus have hidden abilities. It's just kind of whether or not you're able to unlock them and if it's like a good fit. As I said, talk about it later. So your first impression of the character is pretty much all she is. She's a bit of an airhead who happens to be really good at assassination. She joins Night Raid after realizing her talent when defending herself and her friend from her friend's military boyfriend who was abusive. They then sent a squad after her and she killed them all too. She also fits into the older sister role, but like second oldest under Leon. Um, I think her story is kind of interesting as there are a lot of elements of like revolution, and like women are oftentimes part of revolution because they have been, historically oppressed under patriarchal conditions. So having a lot of women, I don't know if that was intentional to be a historical reference. I read, I think, on the Wikipedia that the main kind of creator of the show just wanted a character with a bunch of women around him. Um, and so I don't know if that's intentional, but I think the fact that there are kind of a lot of people who come from different backgrounds is interesting conceptually. Anyways, next is Mine, who's a more typical tsundere type character who comes across as stuck up and super mean, especially to Tatsumi as he's joining. She joined the Revolutionary Army and eventually Night Raid after being discriminated against for being a half foreign born. Being a typical tsundere, she's cold to new members but is kind once she knows who you are. She wields the gun Tegu that increases in power with the more danger she is in, called Pumpkin. She functions as somewhat of a spoiled little sister to most of the group, constantly wanting to go shopping and eat sweets. The racism subplot is low-key dropped after it's introduced, which is odd to me, as removing discrimination from the world is the reason she joined the resistance. But it's not really kind of focused on after its introduction. She's never really discriminated against out in public. There isn't like shown to be a lot of discrimination against people who look like her, or she has like a specific in with a group because she's like understands their plight. So I don't know if it's just forgotten or it's just they didn't think it was very important. But it does yet again tie into this kind of like conception of people who are most likely to join a revolution are those that are directly kind of hurt by the system that exists. Because she and her people are discriminated against, she understands that there's systemic problems that need to be solved through violence, through assassination. All right, which then brings us to Bulat, who is a former military commander who abandoned his post after witnessing the atrocities of capital and being forced to do the dirty work under their orders. Bulat's an interesting character as he is a gay character that doesn't fall into traditional stereotypes. He still falls into some kind of like, I don't know, gags, but he's not effeminate or portrayed as less of a man because of the fact that he's gay. It's just listed alongside the other character quirks. Honestly, I think more could have been done with this concept, as revolution and queer people have often intersected, as I said, due to being historically oppressed. However, most of it's just offhand mentions or minor gags where he'll blush and then Tatsumi will feel uncomfortable or other people will feel uncomfortable. Bulat wields the dragon armor Tegu, which is Incursio, which he shouts out before he equips it. It's really sick. Which allows him to move faster and hit harder and even turn invisible and blend into his surroundings. He doesn't really have a predefined role in the group, but if I had to put him in one, I would say older brother type. And he's especially close with Tatsumi as kind of like just someone he can really get along with. We then meet Lebak, attempting to peek at the girl's bath, which says a lot about his character. I'm not sure why every anime feels like it has to have that one perverted character. And if you watch anime, you kind of know what I mean, like the Sanji, the Jiraiya. But for Akame got killed, that's Lebak. He's constantly trying to peek on, flirt with the girls, and he has very limited success. He wields the string Tegu crosstail, which uses the hair of a dragon to do many different things, such as create armor, allow him to move quickly, and create different objects made of his string. He joined the Revolutionary Army under Najenda, the boss of Night Raid. He has been pursuing romantically since she was a general. He's pursuing her is kind of a weird way. Like, he has feelings and attraction and will follow her to the ends of the earth like that, but hasn't like professed because he's scared of rejection. Even though he gets rejected, it's a little weird. This is the one of the only incidents of the reason behind joining the army actually mattering to the story, as it continues to pine over her throughout the course of the manga. Additionally, I think he grows up as a noble, and his mind's only changed because he respects her so much, which is weird. Like, his background is distinctly different. He comes from nobility. He comes from a higher class, but leaves it behind for the pursuit of the person he loves. Like, well, cute, romantic, interesting, but very different from all these other backgrounds that we have. which include like discrimination of all kinds and like seeing the downtrodden and the bad firsthand, versus his, which is like a nobler birth. We are then introduced to Akame after she is killed and began to cook a giant danger beast bird. Akame is the titular character of Akame ga Kill, and I believe holds the key values of assassins that the series is trying to convey. She was raised to be the ultimate assassin for the Empire, but then realized that she didn't agree with the actions being asked of her and joined Night Raid. She's kind, offering food to Leon and Tatsumi if he agrees to join Night Raid. At this point, he was indecisive. She wields the Taigu Muramasa, the one-hit kill sword that infects the body of anyone who touches it with an incurable poison. Her previous relationship to the capital spices up her character, with her former squad members and family being part of the current Imperial Army, making her conflict much more personal. So, as we will see throughout the series, she directly interacts with her previous comrades, which causes a lot of like emotional tension for her. Additionally, she is a weird character. Like, she isn't super expressive with emotions, and I think is like kind of traumatized from her time being a part of, like, just from her upbringing. It's given her very warped sense of values, but she's like very kind. I really like her design. It's very like edgy, but it's held back and kind of tame. So I don't know. I think it's very well done. But I also really like the colors red and black being used in any context, and those are her main two colors. So I might be biased. Finally, we have Najenda, or Boss, who's the final character we meet for the arc from Night Raid. She's the leader of the operations, meaning she chooses the targets and who to send to assassinate those targets. She's very tactically oriented. She's kind of like the mother role, quote unquote, of the found assassin family, since she's the leader, but she doesn't really act like it. She's very laid back. She doesn't have a Tegu anymore due to losing her arm and eye in a battle with Esdeath after defecting to the Revolutionary Army, but she was the former owner of Pumpkin and has a robotic hand now to replace the one she lost, which has features like a grappling hook. So, something of a theme emerges when examining all these characters back to back in this fashion, which is that they are relatively shallow, relying on pre-existing tropes to some extent to fill in some of the gaps. If I just showed you the female character designs, I bet you would be able to accurately guess their personalities. For instance, the tsundere one, pink, typically wears pink, is short, is like small. Leon, the kind of pervy one, well endowed, wearing scantily clothes. I guess Shiel and Najenda would be harder to guess, but you probably, you'd be close. I think this is mainly done for narrative efficiency and to keep the reader in suspense about any future character deaths. Because if only certain characters were given extra layers of depth, then it would be obvious who is actually important to the story and who is just cheap fodder for like emotional connection. When you meet like in Suicide Squad, where you have everyone gets introduced but it's Captain Boomerang because he wasn't in any of the commercials besides the first like 10 seconds. Or not Captain Boomerang, Slipknot. Yeah, Slipknot. And you're like, oh yeah, this guy's dying. He has to die to prove a point. It's kind of like that. But to kind of overcome this, everyone has similar layers of depth, and it's just that you only get more depth to them if they don't die. But if they die, then they stay at that similar level of depth, which kind of cheapens the generalized process. This is still a problem, however. Just because it serves a narrative purpose doesn't excuse the lack of characterization and execution. For instance, I read the manga like a week and a half ago, and I still feel like I don't actually know some of the characters outside of their narrative purposes. There's also a strange mix of static characters that don't change at all throughout the story, like Leon, Lebuk, Bulat, Najenda, and Akame, versus characters that change substantially, like Mine and Tatsumi. I'm not even sure if this is a criticism of the style of storytelling, just that the shallowness of the characters can make it hard to get invested, especially for those that don't change at all. Yeah. I just wanted to say, kind of before going into the arc, that my favorite characters are Bulat and Akame, as well as Lebuk. Bulat, Gay King, love him. He's a guiding presence for all the members of Night Raid and is very strong, which is a good trait for an assassin. He has, in my opinion, one of the coolest Tegus. It comes with its own transformation sequence. As I said, I really like Akame due to her being the quintessential assassin, but kind of goes against that stereotype by being really kind and sweet and isn't cold and cut off. I also really like her Tegu as well, like just a one-hit kill sword based on like a uncurable poison. Very interesting and makes her battles very tactical. Finally, as I said, LeBook. I know I was railing on him in the character introduction, but I actually really like his character design, and he provides an interesting difference from the rest of the cast, as he's the only person actually concerned with stealth and strategy for the most part, like in battles, who doesn't go on mission. His Taigu also is super versatile and inventive, similar to Doflamingo's Devil Fruit in One Piece, making the character more interesting because he's shown to be inventive and creative with a limited tool. For instance, he makes like a bulletproof vest. He'll make a straight or he'll make a spear that can send his strings into that can do damage. He's like very crafty, which I think is of huge benefit to him. Now that we've met all the characters, I'd like to do a brief plot synopsis of the arc, which I'm considering from chapters 1 to 14. Official arcs kind of exist later, and there are like sub arcs within these first areas, but this is kind of the two major character deaths occur, and I thought 7 was kind of too short, and I didn't want to do like a billion parts. So I'm saying chapters 1 through 14. Anyways, after Tatsumi meets all the assassins in Night Raid, there's a raid on the home base, which gives us a chance to experience the different tegus and fighting styles of the various members, as well as reinforce the idea of Tatsumi's naivete. He hesitates when finishing off an enemy, when the enemy states that he's acting to save his village, which Tatsumi can directly empathize with. I like the way that empathy and naivete are handled in this section as good things to have, but bad for assassins to have on the field, which is, we will later see how Akame deals with her grief, that she thinks it's important to have and to do, but doesn't want to kind of let it get in the way of the mission. I also kind of like, I guess another thing, that the assassins are treated as people and not just like inherent parts of the universe, that they don't exist exclusively as their job, They're people first, assassins 1.5. It's still very important and very like it describes them and defines them, but they're people beyond that. Whereas I feel like typically assassins are kind of portrayed as like they're just assassins. The mission becomes before anything else the most important. Anyways, we then go forward to Tatsumi learning under Akame, learning how to conceal his presence to catch a fish, which leads into the mission to assassinate the military leader, Ogre the Demon, who is a corrupt official who accepts bribes and kills mercilessly. This is also how we learn about how Night Raid selects targets. They get them directly from the people in the capital who report the crimes committed and provide a sum of money for the killing, which funds the Revolutionary Army. That's where these funds go. We are also shown the depths of depravity that exists in the hearts of those with power, with Ogre raging that he will kill the woman who hired the guild, and that he will kill all of her family after he has already killed her husband. So he's basically perpetuating the cycle of revenge, but saying that he didn't go far enough and should have killed every single person. We also learn that this woman was kind of selling her body to get the funds needed, and so we can see that she's like really dedicated. It's a weird, I don't know, it's weird. It's not like any opinion is given kind of like on legalization and usefulness of sex work, just that it exists and was used for the purpose of kind of this revenge, which does lead to Ogre being killed by Tatsumi. We then meet the center of the corruption in the capital, the Prime Minister, Honest, ironic name, as all he does is lie. He controls the child emperor and dissuades him from listening to the complaints of the people and executing innocent people. And he executes innocent people who speak out of line. This dude sucks and is portrayed as the figurehead of the forces that Night Raid are attempting to fight against, with Leone in particular repeatedly expressing her desire to kill him personally. He has done every vile act you can think of and relishes every moment of it. He single-handedly pushes the capital into corruption for his own selfish gains. He is, in the story, the embodiment of evil tyranny. I also think it is kind of serves as interesting world building that the Prime Minister kind of is able to inundate the child emperor from any information outside. Like, he already has such a powerful presence that the child emperor doesn't even won't believe anything else, which kind of keeps the status quo and keeps him in power and allows him to do anything he wants because he's able to kind of control the narrative in a way for the people that actually matter in this kind of monarchy, which is the emperor. We then learn about the tegu, or the magical objects made in ancient times by the old emperor who created the capital and the empire itself. They cannot be recreated with modern technology or alchemical techniques. I will go in more in depth about tegus, what they are, how they work, and my opinions on them later. Next, Akame fights a serial killer with a tegu, and we learn the iron rule of tegu fights, that someone will always die when a fight occurs between two users. This rule is followed basically 100% of the time. It says for one instance, and it's very kind of meaningful that it's not followed in that instance. This rule comes up very quick when Akame and Tatsumi fight the serial killer Zank the Beheader, who wields the Spectator Tegu. He's soundly defeated by Akame, who overcomes seeing the person she loves most because she wants to kill the person she loves most, her sister. Basically, the Spectator Tegu has the ability to make an illusion of the person you love most appear when you're fighting, which will cause you to hesitate, which will give him the advantage because Akame was kind of kicking his ass before then. But as it turns out, she already wants to kill her sister, so that was not a challenge for her. This fight demonstrates the difference between the assassins and a random serial killer like Zank. He hears the voices of people he has killed and carries guilt about his unjust actions, whereas Akame hears no voices, even about her kills pre-revolution, kind of just because she's built different. This isn't really explained, but she's just guilt-free of her actions. Like, I guess it's kind of explained, but she's basically able to bury those, like, thoughts and feelings, like, just put them in a bottle and just not really have to deal with them. This is also the beginning of the theme of death as a means of escape. In this case, Zank can be free from the voices that hound him through the silence of death, potentially what Akame hopes to do for her sister, in the sense that she said she wants to kill her sister, but I don't know, unless there's really bad blood there, maybe she wants to release her sister from like the ills of the capital because she knows it's the only way to kind of make her better, or not make her better, but to make her be free. Next up in training, we have Shield, the airheaded assassin. We learn of her origins, get a better feel for her personality, and learn that she appreciates being useful to the people she cares about. We're also introduced to Esdeath, the warmonger who was supposed to be tied up conquering the northern tribes, and who has instead obliterated the northern tribes, and Doms, the hero of the of the tribe, who is said to be able to stop her, like who had the strength of 100 men. And by Doms, I mean like literally like sadomasochism Doms. It's very explicit and also kind of weird. It's fine. Finally, we meet a kind government official, Siryu, who has an organic tegu, the Hecaton Chires. I'm doing my best with my pronunciation. There's a lot of different stuff. She names Koro. She's an apprentice underling to Ogre, who Tatsumi killed in the previous chapter, as we kind of went over. And he helped her refine her strong sense of duty and justice, which she interprets as punishing evildoers, or specifically retributive justice. So maybe she can be persuaded to join the side of good. Psych. She's actually also a very sadistic person who uses the name of justice to perform acts of her superiors unquestioningly. She basically is super tribal and like very in her like thought process of either you are a good person who is on the side of the law in the capital, or you are a bad person who is outside of those things. And if you are a bad person, then you are not a human anymore, and any amount of violence and threats and death is deserved to anyone who goes kind of outside those rules. She then fights Mine and Shield, eventually killing Shield, who provides a path for Mine to escape from Siryu and the guards that later arrive. This is the first death, main character death in the series. Sayo and Iyatsu don't really count. We meet them the same chapter they die, and so it doesn't really matter like to the same degree. Like it sets the tone, but it's not actually the same as this, as a character we've met and kind of been around before. And if you aren't expecting it, it hits like a truck. Seeing a character that was part of the main gang torn in half in a really gory way drives home the point of the fact that these characters aren't special, they don't have plot armor, they are just skilled people with special weapons, and they die like everyone else. This is a core theme of the show in a way, that these people won't be remembered by history, aren't heroes that save the day, but killers who change the country for the better. This marks the first major shift in the status quo of the series and makes watching future battles much more intense as the stakes are very real. I will say that I typically don't read shows or watch shows where I know that like characters die a lot, because it feels like there's no point in becoming emotionally invested in someone like the author doesn't care about. Like, if the author doesn't care, why should I care? And I feel like the show kind of avoids that trap in a way, because I feel like the author does care. It's just that, and that the deaths are meaningful because the author cares. Like, Shield didn't die for no reason. She died, like, I mean, narratively to set the stakes, but also because she wasn't strong enough, because she couldn't make it, and she died saving her friend, which I think is like in character for her. She wanted to feel appreciated. She is glad she was able to give her life in this way. She feels appreciated in death. So I think that's kind of like a way Agame got killed kind of is different than a lot of other shows that seem to just not care about their characters. That they do care about the characters, but they think that the death of the characters is almost equally important to the level of care. Anyways, so everyone is mourning the loss of Shield in their own way, with Mine and Tatsumi taking it the hardest, seemingly, and Akame looking as though she's unbothered, reflecting the difference in experience of losing comrades, as Mine and Tatsumi are the youngest members of Night Raid. Tatsumi then goes on a mission with Leon and is confronted with the fact that the people he kills aren't all heartless monsters, but instead are still people, who other people love and care about. In this case, it was the son of a man he murdered came into the room after he had murdered him. Tatsumi then says it's a stain that will always remain with you, and I think that's true for him, as he has a high degree of empathy, which is mixed with his naivete. This is another thing I was talking about, where I think this separates kind of Agame got killed from other shows in which, you know, you're on the side of the people committing violence, that they try to inject nuance, that not all of these people are the worst all the time, that they have like family, they have friends, that like this is a violent act. This is kind of something you would expect the villains to be using a violent approach. And yet it is still necessary to use this approach. Just due to how far the systems have kind of like failed the main people, or have failed the people in general, but also Night Raid. Like, they are a product of this system, and so they are the corrective force that will lead to a better tomorrow in their own way. So Esdeath has returned to the capital with her 3 beast warriors, who also wield Tegu, meaning that any confrontation with them could result in another casualty for Night Raid. Esdeath is rewarded for her work in suppressing the North and requests for a group of 6 Tegu users to track down and eliminate Night Raid, which, coming from any other person, would be seen as a power grab, but the Prime Minister trusts Esdeath's loyalty. They know that she doesn't actually want power, that she lives purely for battle. She also wants to try her hand at love, which results in some wild hijinks. This also brings up a point of the show that I'm not necessarily fond of, which is that basically all of the girls, and even like Bulat, the only main gay character, fall head over heels for Tatsumi. Shield falls for him. Well, not okay. So this one's kind of weird because it's contextualized, but she falls for him. Like, she has a moment where she's like, "Oh, I'm glad I could be appreciated," and he's like laying on her. It's kind of weird. Esdeath is about to fall for him as soon as she meets him. Mine falls for him. Leon is constantly hitting on him. I just think that it's unnecessary, and that it kind of is at conflict with the rest of the tone. Like, it's very serious, but still has like a level of optimism, which I really like. But I think adding all of this just like almost like harem-esque romance where everyone kind of really likes and is emotionally like falls for Tatsumi is just unnecessary. I don't think it adds much. And I'm glad that as kind of the story goes on, it kind of falls away. Like, Esdeath still, like, all the people still like him, but once he makes his decision, they all kind of respect that decision. And so it's less kind of in your face, which I really appreciate. Additionally, kind of as this character is, I don't go into as much because we don't meet her as much. She comes up much more in like the next arc. But her introduction is very interesting. She's like almost like a force of nature. She just doesn't care politically about power. She just wants her own. She has her own kind of sense of justice that is at conflict with everyone else's, which I find to be interesting, and I'll get more into later. But she's a very interesting character, and yeah, as I said. So back in the story, Akame breaks down after Tatsumi compliments her on how well she stays composed after an ally's death, which is in fact her breaking point. She explains that you can never get used to losing a loved one in the line of duty, but instead that she is able to bury her emotions to better serve the mission. I think this adds some complexity and maturity to Akame. She's not jaded and numb to the pain due to losing so many people, but instead grieves in her own way and on her own time. This transitions into a promise from Tatsumi to never die so that she doesn't have to experience that pain with him, which is pretty cheesy for such a dark manga, but I think this demonstrates the inherent contrast of the premise, following a naive, hopeful character in a dark and bleary world. Which, and this is kind of like the conflict that I think in the tone and in the like plot that I actually like. The like optimism in a dark world versus like kind of a like having everyone fall for Tatsumi in a dark world makes it kind of just less believable and less interesting. Yeah, but I think those are kind of different, even though they both conflict. Next, we see the three demon beasts assigned a mission to kill the previous prime minister, who seems to have cared about the people like deeply and make good laws before the current prime minister, and is currently en route to the capital. There's also a bit of backstory provided for the head of the beasts, of the demon beasts, who was a previous commander and says that he respects the politicking of the prime minister, but orders are absolute. This is another theme that is touched on in the manga, but isn't really fully explored, or it's not explored to its logical end point, I should say, as there are several characters that internal sense of justice compels them to follow orders even when they personally disagree. Basically, that they will listen to the orders of their superior even if they personally think that the orders are wrong, and they will still carry out that act even if it is against their own kind of like sense of justice. But as I said, this never really comes to anything. It kind of just paints them in their own camp. It is kind of related to the Reformist Party, which is what comes up next arc, which I think adds a lot of like intrigue and interest. But as I said, next arc. After the assassination is over, the beasts spread propaganda posters pinning the blame on Night Raid, both to cover their tracks as well as to increase public distrust of the assassin group. We then proceed to the finale of the arc, in which Bulat and Tatsumi sneak onto a boat to find the people that have been besmirching the name of Night Raid. There are several groups sent to different likely locations of attack, and Leon follows Esdeath around to keep tabs on her. The whole troop ends up being on the boat, causing a fight between the two groups, with our heroes outnumbered 3-2, and Tatsumi doesn't have a Tegu, so it's closer to 3 to 1.5. Tatsumi and Bulat being the 1.5. Tatsumi is shown the lack of experience he has fighting in general, but specifically Tegu users, as he almost falls into a trap, but Bulat saves him and turns the tide in seconds. In this moment, we also learn that Bulat has a previous relationship with the leader of the beasts, who was his former captain, Liver. Bulat kills Datara, the axe wielder, and goes into a 1v1 with his old mentor, who now uses water powers to assail him on all sides. Tatsumi fights Niao, the flute user, Tatsumi's holding his own against Niao fairly well until he abruptly loses, which is fair when fighting a Tegu user without one of your own. They basically give you superpowers. The Tegus do. And they have to be combative. I'll get into it later. We learned why Liver joined Esdeath and how he survived after being disposed of by the military, which was that Esdeath used her political sway with the prime minister to absolve the previous crimes because she thought it would be a waste to kill a strong leader, for which Liver dedicated the rest of his life to serving her. Which he makes good on this promise to her by poisoning himself and then using water manipulation to put his blood in Bulat, killing them both. Bulat gives Tatsumi and Kurzio to deal with the finer member of the beasts, with Bulat seeing his potential before closing his eyes for the last time. Tatsumi cries at the loss of another ally, whom he indirectly slowed down due to his weakness. But before the end of the arc, we cut to Kurome, Akame's sister, sitting on a pile of corpses, who receives a message that she has been requested to come back to the capital to join Esdeath's new team. So this action sequence, this fighting sequence, I think it's good. I really like the art and kind of like the interesting use of tegus and kind of expanding on what they can be and what they can do. But I feel like Bulat's death was, I don't know, weaker. Like it kind of shows that no matter how strong you are, how invincible you are, like people who are willing to kind of do mutually assured destruction kind of win. Like, and that kind of comes up later too. But I just think that it's uh, weaker than not weaker. It's just different than Shield's death. It's a different vein. Like she dies because she's weak, but he dies in part due to protecting Tatsumi, in part due to the fact that he just underestimated his former captain. Another thing I think that's interesting here is kind of like the loyalty that is shown by Liver to Esdeath, that she saves him and basically says like, you would have died, you now work for me, I control your life, you are mine. And I just think that's interesting, like that. I feel like life debts are usually kind of, I don't know, cringe and lame in most writing, but the way he's like, he has fallen in love with her almost, and so he's like, she's the way forward, she's how I put my full faith and trust in her. And I don't know, I find that to be interesting. I think it's kind of different than the usual like life death trope. Life debt, not life death. All right, so that was the general plot synopsis for the first 14 chapters of the manga. I skipped over a fair bit of stuff for time, especially like a lot of the particulars and the details and some of like the vibes, one might say. So I still recommend reading it for yourself if you can handle the content. But now that that's done, I want to investigate some of the important themes that I saw while reading. First and foremost is the relationship between violence and morality. By this I mean that the central concept of the show is a group of assassins murdering people for personal and political reasons. In many different manga, this could be seen as a villainous group. For example, in many ways, Night Raid is like the Akatsuki and Naruto. They are both comprised of morally dubious characters that have their own goals within the organization, using their specific magical powers to accomplish them. The main difference between them is in framing and intent. We see that the capital of Akame ga Kill is so corrupt that the only way in which to bring about political change in any way is via the direct application of violence. There isn't a system. They can't really elect a new prime minister. The previous prime minister was just killed. They can't elect a new emperor. That's an inherited title. The only way to do it is to assassinate those who have the political power. You can't vote these people out of office or anything. Whereas in Naruto, the Akatsuki don't try any other methods besides mass murder to accomplish their goals. And the leaf isn't shown to be corrupted enough to justify a total violent revolution. At least that's not why most of them are doing it. It says for like Sasuke and Itachi, but that's a little too much to go into right now. But they are different. Their situations are different and similar. I don't know. Naruto's a weird show thematically that I might talk about eventually, but not right now. So the show directly addresses this apparent contradiction in its world building, that the heroes aren't heroes. They are assassins who are going to have their hands stained with blood of their victims, like Tatsumi said. I like how this is handled, not skirting around the issue or trying to make excuses about what they're doing is different because it's for a good cause, but that they've made peace with the fact that what they're doing is wrong to make the world better. You know, it's kind of like the Dark Knight quote where it's like, you stick your hands in the mud so that we can keep ours clean. But that's kind of, this is that taken to its logical extreme. There's additional nuance in the show's handling of the serial killer Zank the Beheader, which is directly contrasted against Akame, who isn't eaten up by the victims of her murders like Zank is. And Zank is only released from the voices in death. I think that's just like showing the different guilt, that Akame doesn't have guilt in the same way as Zank, because Zank did it like things he viewed as bad and for the wrong reasons, whereas Akame did bad things but what she views as the right reasons, or that it's less morally dubious for her because it's just something she has to do, whereas Zank like feels regret and remorse and is released in death. Ties into another theme of the show, which is that surface level viewing and understanding of the world are often wrong, as seen with basically every noble person who personally torments slaves, or how the military exists to expand the empire instead of protecting the citizens of the capital. The leaders are unwilling to uphold their end of the social contract and instead use the power invested in them by the citizens to increase their material possessions and wealth. Basically, that everything that we see and think of in society is in fact corrupted and being used in almost opposition to what it was designed for. The government is supposed to represent and help people on a scale that they're unable to help themselves, but instead it's exploiting the people to help the people in the government. It's the opposite of what the intention has been kind of made. This also feeds into the uniqueness of the series, that it combines a gritty, edgy, awful world with a group of characters that believe it can be better and are willing to sacrifice everything to change it. Speaking of sacrifice, that's another major theme present in the story. Sacrificing of the self, of morality, and of others. Everyone in the series is constantly sacrificing to meet their goals. Well, almost everyone. So far, we haven't seen Esdeath or the Prime Minister sacrifice anything, just their underlings. But I guess you could say that they do, in fact, sacrifice those underlings, which is another interesting concept in the manga, that not just the heroes make sacrifices, but also kind of what we would consider the villains or the villainous side. For instance, Siryu underwent painful surgeries in the pursuit of power. Liver willingly killed himself to make sure that he was able to take out Bulat, the mutually assured destruction I was talking. Mutually assured destruction. It's mad. This demonstrates the beginning of the parallels between the two sides. That the enemy isn't just made of inhuman monsters who only want to spread evil, but also just people doing their jobs who believe in the cause that they serve. It's not that the people who are evil know that the system that they are working under is evil and just accept it. It's also people who believe that this is the best way to go about things. Overall, the point of Akame ga Kill is to show the conditions in society that have led to the creation of Night Raid, a society in which you have no fundamental protections, where the average person is fearful for their life every day, and the rich and powerful are unable to be held accountable within the system. Basically, showing a society in decline, where the previous rules and regulations have become rotten due to corruption, creating a need to start fresh and instill a new governmental body, which can only be achieved through violence due to lacking even the ability to elect rulers. This is reflected many times in real life societies, such as the fall of Rome, the French Revolution. Additionally, there is a connection to the Nazi Party from the clothing and design of the military elements, such as Esdeath's outfit, which makes it more sense as we learn about her backstory. She seems to be very fascistic in nature, and very much... which I will go into later because it's not in this part of the story, but I'll show kind of like her outfit and how it looks very much so like what is similar to a Nazi uniform, which I think is interesting and does kind of like map a lot of themes and like makes a lot of sense. This show is about revolution, and it tries to show the costs to the people, the costs to the revolutionaries, and the costs to the system, as well as critiquing reformist policies and people who defend an evil status quo. This becomes much more apparent later in the show as the distinct groups form, specifically the Jaegers, which are the group that Kurome is going to join and that Esdeath is creating of Tegu users to take out Night Raid. So that's basically all I wanted to focus on for the first part of this series. Based on how I've kind of separated and created the arcs, there will be 4 parts in total. I don't know how long this will be, but anyways, times that by 4, or hopefully not much longer than that. I don't know how long it'll take, but remember to like and subscribe. Thanks.